The interesting thing is that that the shifting loyalties, or the shifting no, not loyalties. That's not the point. I mean, alliances. Okay, the most interesting question of loyalties came in the difference between the fight over CCM and the fight over sexuality. With CCM, it was the evangelical Catholics and the liberals, the left, who joined together basically to make that happen. The evangelical Catholics because they really wanted the episcopacy, and the left because they were attracted to the Episcopal Church as a sort of a partner in the kind of sort of left-wing ideology that they envisioned for the ELCA, of course. Now, interesting thing is that on the fight on sexuality, what this meant was a split for the evangelical Catholics. Because there are evangelical Catholics who are very supportive of the new sexuality. I mean, if you've ever been to Mount Olive Church in Minneapolis, anybody ever been to Mount Olive? If you're allergic to incense, don't go. But they are about as high as you can get. I went to an ordination there once. Interesting. It was an ordination. I mean, they had everything. I mean, they chanted the gospel. They had incense and everything like that. The only thing they really didn't have was the ordinance spread eagle at the foot of the bishop. But it was about as high an ordination as I'd ever seen. And this candidate was going out to a 2-point parish in southwestern Minnesota. You can only imagine what the people from the parish thought when they saw this ordination. It wasn't it wasn't her cup of tea, but it was a long story about why that all happened. But I want to go into that. But in other words, so what happens is, of course, you've got to form something like core, because word alone, these people are never going to work with word alone. So you had to form core as a way to get evangelical Catholics and low church pietists to work together on the issue of sexuality. And this is what I mean by, this is what modern denominations look like. They're competing and oftentimes changing patterns of alliances between pressure groups. And of course, most people are in the middle. They can be pulled one way or another. And of course, in the issue of sexuality, what they believed was, the main people in the middle believed that this was the way, literally, it was a compromise that would allow the denomination to stay together. All right? It's not a compromise. It's not a compromise. The forces of revision won. The people who wanted to hold to traditional morality lost. This is one of the big things. It's not a compromise. In the Missouri Synod, you have the same kind of pressure groups. I'm not as familiar with them, but there are. So in the LCMS, there are the hardline conservatives. You've got the church growth people. You've got what I would call the traditional LCMS. In other words, people who remember sort of the denominational culture as it was before, say, 1960, kind of thing like that. And all sorts of different groups. There's all sorts of groups in Missouri. They keep popping up with new ones, and it's hard for me to follow. But Jesus First, Daystar. What did I see? The more conservative ones. Eldona. Could be. That's not one I'm familiar with. There's the Society of Saint something or other. John the Steadfast. That was a new one to me. I've not even figured that one out yet. But that came up to me. And of course, what they're doing is they're again trying to trying to manipulate or capture the denominational machinery one way or another. All right. So a lot of pastors in both denominations are confused or bewildered. How do you survive? How do you survive? And most pastors have come up with what I call a version of the local option. In other words, build your own version of truth within your local congregation. Keep the denominational officials happy, but at arm's length. And the moderates in the Missouri Synod have been the champions of this. But ELCA pastors, I think, are increasingly learning from their LCMS brothers how to do this. And the trouble is that this means a tremendous internal diversity within denominations now. Congregations are all over the map. If you go to the Twin Cities and you go to any 10 ELCA or LCMS congregations, you will find very few things that are similar, right? Congregations this is not so much in the rural areas where there's less options for people, but especially in the urban areas, people have all sorts of options as to what kind of Lutheranism they want to be affiliated with. Now, I'm going to suggest that what this has meant is a perfect storm of issues, especially for the ELCA, but also in some respects for the LCMS. If you take our very well documented and long-term structural decline of American Lutheranism, ELCA has lost 750,000 people since 1988 and has lost 500,000 of those since 2000. We're losing, on the average, between about 75 and 100,000 members a year in the ELCA. Right? Our market share, the American Lutheran market share, is down in the last 50 years 40%. The demographic decline of our denominations and the recession and the contentious issues that we have fought over for the last 20 years. Okay? Now, denominational officials tend to believe that these are things that will blow over quickly. They'll try to limit their losses. They'll try to hold the bulk of people together. I remember hearing one bishop say recently that, well, it's all right. Everything's going to be all right. We still have 97% of our congregations. But what they don't see is the tip of the iceberg. In other words, for every congregation, what do we have now? I think I've seen about 200 or so Lutheran congregations have left the ELCA since August of 2009. All right? But that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the tip of the iceberg. First of all, we'll never go back to the way we were before. And 9/10 of the problem is like the iceberg submerged below the surface. First of all, it's too different. They've made it too difficult for congregations to leave the ELCA. I've never quite figured out why a bishop. Remember this? You heard about this congregation in Florida that decided to leave the ELCA, and then the Synod Council wouldn't let them. What good is the congregation going to be to that synod? Are they going to be happier with the synod because the synod didn't allow them to go? What kind of ministries can be done in that? Why?
We must call that love.
I don't know what it means. But it's too difficult. We shouldn't make it so difficult for congregations to leave the ELCA. They're not going to be any good. Disaffected congregations are not going to be any good. Are they going to give more money to the synod because the synod said, well, you can't leave?